Just a note before we start. Our show talks about touchy subjects that may be difficult for some of our listeners. Take care of yourself. If you feel you need to seek help, see the links at the end of our show notes for resources.
Hey y'all, and welcome to Touchy Subjects Podcast, the podcast that aims to break the silence that tends to come with conversations around domestic and sexual violence. I'm Sean.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are going to be discussing engaging men with our special guest, Martin Henson. So thank you for joining us today, Martin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. These kind of conversations are always one of the ones that I enjoy having the most, so I'm really glad we could have you here. But before we jump into the episode, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to our audience?
For sure. My name is Martin Henson. I'm the executive director of the BMEN Foundation, an organization designed to build support spaces for Black men and advocacy for issues specific to Black men. I also wear a couple other hats. I write, do public speaking. I was an organizer at the point in time. Still call myself an activist. I think it still counts. But that's the general picture of who I am.
Sure. Well, thanks for that quick introduction. And yeah, one of the things that we have you here today, obviously, to discuss and talk about men. So really, what is BMEN and kind of how did you get started in that work?
Yeah, BMEN is an interesting history, and I haven't really given the full overlay in a while. I guess I don't explain it often because it's such a winding road. So BMEN initially came out of wanting to build a response to Me Too. At the time, I was an organizer in the Black Lives Matter movement, and we were doing all the activist things that you do. And that came up. Me Too was a moment, if you all remember.
Mm-hmm.
The I don't know what this is called, but I remember the day that the hashtag dropped. And for those who don't remember Me Too, or the younger folks who don't know that moment, I can't remember exactly who it was who began the hashtag, but the hashtag Me Too, with women talking about experiences with sexual violence, I want to say originated on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And it came across all the platforms. And I remember looking on Facebook, and I was like, oh, there's no men saying anything, which means a few different things. But I remember that silence. So me being the organizer, the person who wants to create change that I was at the time, I was like, oh, we need to create a space for Black men to respond to this. So a lot of listening and thinking and processing, kind of moving to a point where I was like, oh, actually, maybe centering Black men as responders to sexual violence as a primary focal point might be a little racially problematic. So I was like, oh, but something still needs to happen. So when I started having conversations with men around sort of the Me Too subject matter, guys were having stories,
mm-hmm.
and more than you would think. And I was like, oh, we need a space. We need our own space to just kind of just talk through these things. But we also just need our own space to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where BMEN support spaces came from. So like it ultimately became more removed from that specific response to sexual violence. But that's a part of our history in a really interesting way.
Yeah. And I do love that it is a space that's created for men to be able to have some of those conversations, because it can be really hard for men, right? Especially when it's coming faced with like, oh, maybe I have done harm before. And that can be a really hard thing for men to discuss, because no one wants to admit they've done harm. No one wants to think about they've hurt somebody else, especially if they believe they've been well-intentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So having that space for them is really, really cool. And I applaud you for kind of seeing that lack of that gap early on and working on creating that space, especially for Black men, because of that over-resounding societal belief that tends to push Black men into those spaces of like feeling like they're the ones causing harm, or the belief that Black men are the ones who are causing harm. So having that space for them is a really important piece. So I give you some kudos for recognizing that very early on in that movement.
And I love the ripple effect that you see with this kind of thing, right? Because like you were saying, oh, hey, there's this movement going on. There's no space for me in it. Okay, maybe that's not the right space for me,
Mm-hmm.
but now I can recognize that it's a need, and it just goes to show the effect that that one little thing, not that the Me Too movement was little by any means, that's not what I'm saying, but like the way that one thing can open the doors for other people to say, "Hey, we need space for this too." And it just flow naturally that way. And so many people think that like, oh, okay, this little thing that I'm doing is only going to affect me, or it's not going to make a difference in the world. But like that butterfly effect kind of thing that happens from it can be so powerful. And I think that is exactly like the power that we're seeing with your foundation here.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. And so here's another uh parallel sort of entry point to be into is like a lot of things were happening at the same time. So due to my organizing and activism with Black Lives Matter, even though Black men were the primary inciting factor for that organizing, the, there was such a profound struggle with Black male victimization and
Mm-hmm.
discussing it uh, that it still perplexes me to this day. So at the time I was, once upon a time I was a therapist. I'm not one now, but back then I was doing that and I was looking across the mental health responses that were happening toward people who were victims. And I noticed two things. One of them was that Black men were not being spoken of as victims.
Mm-hmm.
So we were seeing all of these things happen, but there's this weird aversion towards doing that. And then in the spaces that I was in, I was like, oh, even in the mental health field, we're not doing this thing, which has a whole bunch of racial implications. So like these things all come together and it intertwines into what became BMEN.
Yeah.
I think Sean and I see that a lot in our fields too, because we work in domestic and sexual violence. And I know, like, for me personally, coming into my role here, all of the previous material that we had was very much she victim, he perpetrator.
Mm,
And that was the message that we were putting out there, which stemmed from, 50 years ago when everything started and all of the um, stuff that kind of comes along with that, which we don't have time to get into. But being able to switch that narrative to, instead of saying she victim, he perpetrator, we can say just victim and perpetrator, or
yeah.
we can say they, or we can say all genders, or we can say, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so I think that that's a really important step that has been happening in the last, I don't know, decade or two.
Hmm.
And the more we can push it, the more we can kind of get away from these gendered ideas of who is a victim, the better off we're going to be as a society.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And it's interesting thing about the conversation that I often have with a lot of my students too is the community that I work in is pretty good mix, right? Or racially. So one of the schools that I work with is primarily Black students, and it's really interesting hearing, especially from like the young guys there, when we're talking about like victims and everything, that a lot of them still don't think they could recognize abuse in themselves, right? If they were being a victim of abuse, because they're like, oh, well, she couldn't hurt me, right? Like, I'm tough, I'm strong. So really latching on still to those stereotypical beliefs about what it means to be a man and how we really latch on to wanting to show that we're strong, that we can't be weak, that someone couldn't have power over us. But as those conversations can kind of go, I can kind of, some of them, not all of them, some of them still leaves like believing like, oh, I can't, that would never happen to me. But some of them do kind of start to get to understanding of, well, if my belief is that I'm always supposed to be strong, what happens when I'm not? What happens when I don't feel strong?
Mhm.
Who can I go to? What can I do then? And we're like, I can't talk to anybody.
Mhm.
So we have to keep up that facade. You have to keep wearing that mask, because if that mask comes off, you don't have anyone.
I think
Yeah.
that's a great leeway into something that we wanted to talk to you today about, Martin,
Mhm.
was we need to kind of, I think, recognize the difference between hurt and harm.
Yeah.
And I know we kind of talked about this a little bit beforehand, so I'd love to kind of use that as a segue to dive into that from your perspective and, get a better idea of, okay, maybe this person didn't physically hurt you because you still have to maintain that strong man persona, but you can still recognize that this person caused you harm.
Absolutely. Uh, and it's such a mixed bag for men that I feel gets lost when men aren't engaging in the conversation, because being vulnerable costs something relative to your presentation, what you call it masculinity, whether you look at it in some other frame. It costs something. So to say you you hurt me. Matter of fact, let me tell the story. I haven't told the story publicly. Never planned to, but I was talking to a friend of mine about what it's like to date and be in relationship with women. And I told him, and he pushed back, as he should have. I told him, I was like, hey, if I'm dating and I tell a woman, I can't tell her that she hurt me. She wants a masculine presentation of injury. I can say, hey, stop doing that, cut that out. But she doesn't want to hear like you hurt me, because that feels soft, and that disrupts the sort of expectation that she has for me. Now, taking that and expanding it further, this lives in society, so that these men who are often hurt don't want to signal to anybody that they're vulnerable by saying that they've been harmed or that they're a victim. Like I know men who've gone through all types of crazy stuff, and they'll never say I'm a victim, because victim unfortunately comes with this label. And because of that, this distinction between what hurts and being harmed is not held by men well, because they have to sacrifice something to call to it.
Yeah. And we're even taught that if something does hurt, like, you just got to push through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even trying to understand the recognize it, like the difference between harm and hurt to begin with, it's like it's hard for us to even kind of connect that, because, well, yeah, something hurt me, but I have to tough through it, so it shouldn't have hurt. So I'll toughen up in this moment. I won't say it hurt, even if it did, and I'll move on. And we just kind of like just keep pushing that shit down, right? And I think having this conversation, especially that expanded conversation of just in general versus just in a relationship too, is like we're taught that with everything. Like, I'm not allowed to feel pain. I'm not allowed to hurt, because as a man, I shouldn't feel those things.
Then that pain is the other part of it too, is that pain is relational and is relative. So if I say, if I'm with my kid, I have a daughter, she's amazing, by the way. If when I was younger, or when she was younger, I would get a different reaction from people when they would see me with my child. And socially with men, you're allowed to feel hurt in a few different scenarios. Like, if something happens to my kid, I can cry. If something happens to a family member, a loved one, I can cry. I can cry because I want someone else to be happy. It's always a function of a relationship with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I can do emotion in that way, but to have a self-framing reference of my own pain and have people respond to it, like, is that a risk that I want to take? If I want to say something hurt me, sometimes the cost isn't just being able to say the words, but me as a man, I know what it's like to tell somebody that something hurt and have them just look at you.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. Well, like get over it, like
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately that's the counter that we're also working to deal with. So we're dealing with our ability to be able to verbalize experiences of pain or discomfort, and we're dealing with the way people respond to us when we do.
Mhm. Yeah. And it even kind of made me think a little bit too, because you mentioned your daughter. So thinking of my son, he just turned 1 year old, and even when he like we're trying to make sure that he's okay with like falling down and like things like that, right? Because like we don't want him to be afraid of trying to walk. So it's like he'll fall down and we'll kind of like make some faces at him and like try to like make him feel happy, even though it might have hurt. And then if he starts crying, like we'll grab him and stuff. But I had to catch myself early on, because every time that would happen, I would go to pick him up and like try to comfort him. I'm like, you're okay, you're okay. Like, but he's crying. Like, so he's clearly giving me the indication that something is wrong. Like he is not okay in this moment. And yes, he's one, but recognizing that early now, so that's not language I'm choosing to use in the future, because I want my son to feel like if something is wrong, that he is able to cry, that he is able to express those feelings of pain, of hurt, of sadness, because I want to help him grow up to be that whole person, to be able to experience these emotions, to have the harder conversations with his friends, with his aunts and uncles, with all of these different people. And it starts early. It starts with those kinds of things of like, you're okay when really you're not. And I don't want him to grow up to believe that even if I'm not okay, I have to feel like I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And then like here's the other thing, like we have to grow up with. My pain, I mentioned earlier that pain is relative. So if I have a room full of 5 people who are younger than me and maybe women and children, and everybody's hurting, my pain gets to be felt last because I have to make sure
Yeah.
they're all right. So this sort of, even the positive forms of masculinity, or the affirming ones that are good, they come with this sort of cost.
Yeah. Are we actively hurting ourselves trying to be good for everyone else?
Yeah.
And it's something I recognize too, like with my wife, is like if our son wakes up in the middle of the night, like I will try to get up and I will try to make sure that I'm doing that, and I'll take that on because I want her to feel well rested. I want her to be good. I want our son to be good. I'll deal with my stuff last.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not sustainable. It's like we've hit a point where it's like my wife and I, like we do the trade-offs. It sucks for her one night, it sucks for me the next, because if I'm taking on all of that, it's not going to work. Like eventually there will be those crashes, and that's, again, it's not sustainable for us.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And these ideas that, men have had kind of bred into them from childhood of this masculinity of taking care of other people first, it's not something that you can easily outgrow either. And you have no control when you're a child over how society puts that pressure on you. But then as an adult, you're expected to make those changes if you want to grow as a person, but you have
Mm-hmm.
no basis for it, right? Like you don't know how to do it, how to make that switch. And like obviously I'm speaking from the point of a woman here, but with my husband, he grew up in a house that was very like men do these things and you just suck it up and you make sure you're providing for your family, and it doesn't matter if your back hurts or if your feet hurt from being in your work boots all day or whatever. And even like in our relationship, that we don't try and push those kinds of like gendered roles. And I tell him it's okay to do those things. It's okay to feel like that. He's battling 40 years of
Mm-hmm.
those thoughts in his head. So it's not like it's even something that I can try and help fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like, and I really appreciate hearing you doing that. But yeah, it's a long period of time of things.
Uh-huh.
So with me and I guess how I exist in the world generally, I am, a masculine guy uh, who presents a certain way. And I don't think for a lot of folks they've seen anybody that looks like me in a public forum talk about softness in these ways that are affirming and caring and responsive. So when we do BMEN groups, creating a space where I'm modeling that and I'm encouraging other folks to do the same, because I benefit from being in that space too. But you're right, like that you get 40 years of being told that to hold it in. And if you don't hold it in, someone else may suffer. And I don't want to be, and I know that some of the racial outcomes of this, or the gender and race outcomes of this, I don't want to be 50 years old with colon cancer that could have been dealt with earlier, that I didn't go get fixed because I didn't want to tell anybody I was hurting. I didn't want to be an inconvenience because I had to take care of this person, and this person. And I know that those like physical health costs, your body keeps the score, like the book says, like those really matter. And I don't want to be that. And so I try to model the more expansive way of relating to the world in a form that folks aren't used to.
Yeah. And you really kind of, you mentioned a little bit, like you really kind of fit into that nice intersection too. Obviously, being a Black man, like you have the opportunity and ability. One, like you said, people aren't used to seeing someone who looks like you presenting as masculine, having those kind of conversations around softness, of vulnerability. But it's also a little bit different coming from you because it's not very often there are spaces that are created specifically for Black men to hear from other Black men about these kinds of things. It's one thing for myself to try to have these conversations with some of my students, but I'll never be able to come to relate to them in that intersection.
Uh-huh.
I know what messages have been given to me as a white man, and I know what messages I have to follow and have been taught I have supposed to follow throughout my life, but the racial aspect of it doesn't come in.
Uh-huh.
There's pressures, there's not pressures there that a Black man may experience. So you really fit neatly into this kind of intersection to be able to have these conversations that I think are really important to have.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it is hard. It's very hard because because of all of the racial framings, in many ways, there's a sense of no matter what I do or how good a program is or how good I am, I'm still going to be viewed in this lens of a hypersexual, violent, deviant man to somebody.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Like that's just going to be what they feel and think and believe. But I'm having to navigate a few different things, all of which are important to me. One of them is Black men being received well and having spaces to process, because there's not enough therapists or psychiatrists or any of that to give us the sort of support that we need for all the oppressive things that happen in our world. And dealing with women who are navigating men who have been harmful in their life and having these spaces where we bring men together to talk about it. And doing that in a way that serves the interventions that work. Because sometimes people want it to happen, but they want it to be punitive. Like they want you, like, go take care of that man, like he's a problem. And I'm like, oh, okay, so what if maybe that, and what if being a supportive space for him so he doesn't harm again is my role? What if that's part of it? So that can be all of it. None of it situates me well, So I have to come from a place where I care about it. I can show that it works, and I can build things that other people can replicate, or at least I can join in if they're already doing it.
Yeah. Well, like especially like when someone has done harm, right? Like the way that our just system is set up is like there's that punitive aspect to it, but a lot of times like that's where they want it to end.
Yeah.
And one, for victims, that's really not, for a lot of victims, that's not going to be their outcome, right? A lot of victims aren't going to have that punitive thing happen to the person who's done harm to them. Just the way the system works. 3% of rapists will ever spend 1 day in jail. So 97% of them will never receive those punitive harms.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are also on the flip side of that, looking at how do we prevent these harms, right? How do we prevent domestic violence, prevent sexual assault? We have to create spaces where people who have done these harms have the ability to have these conversations, to learn where they're hurting someone or causing harm in a community and how they can rectify some of that behavior, right? Because if someone has done harm in the past and they're always going to just continually be treated like the person who's done harm, why would someone who's being treated as a villain try to make the decision to not do that?
Right.
So I think it's a really important thing, and it can be really hard too for people in like Amanda's and my line of work, where we work more so with victims than we do perpetrators, to kind of have some of those conversations, because we want victims to always feel safe. And if we're creating spaces for abusive people or people who have abused, does that take away then from some of the work that we're doing with victims, or the belief of, is this going to take away from some of the work that we're doing with victims? And I would argue that it enhances some of that work, not putting them together, right? Like not putting victims and abusers in the same room and having them have the conversations. But if we can impact both sides of this, the harm and those who have done it, we can start to heal some of those wounds in our communities, where we're seeing people consistently being harmed because we're willing to have the harder conversations.
Yeah.
And there's a really important aspect of that too, from, a woman's point of view, that we're taught from an early age to be afraid of men.
Mm-hmm.
And with good reason in some cases, because
Mhm.
the majority of victims are women and the majority of
Mm-hmm.
perpetrators are men. And we're taught that, in order to not be a victim, we have to play an active role in protecting ourselves, which in a lot of cases means don't go somewhere with a strange man, or don't be in a situation where you could potentially get harmed. Otherwise, it's your fault. And how can we teach women to start trusting men while still trying to keep ourselves safe? Like, you know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that it's ever somebody's responsibility to prevent themselves from being harmed, because that's a decision that falls 100% on the perpetrator. But an analogy I use is that, like, I know that if I come up to a crosswalk and my little light is green and I'm supposed to cross the street now, I'm still going to look both ways before I cross the street, because I do still have a duty to try and protect myself from someone else not following those rules.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have to have a little bit of that harm reduction kind of tucked away in ourselves, just as self-preservation. That's a
Mm-hmm.
survival instinct. But, when and where can we start to bring a little bit of trust in society back into that equation?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost kind of hits on a little bit too, like what you had spoken a little bit about, Martin, especially like in your identities as a Black man, like having all those pressures of consistently just being seen as this like hypersexual, violent person. Women are taught that men are going to cause them harm. So if men want that stereotype to not be attributed to them anymore, we have to engage with other men and say, hey, we shouldn't be behaving in this manner. Yes, we can say like we'll never harm somebody, right? Like I would never sexually assault someone. But if I'm not willing to advocate for women, if I'm not willing to call out and educate other men when they do things that are harmful to women, I'm co-signing their abuse, even if I'm not the one doing it.
Mhm.
So yes, we have a responsibility to not harm others, but we also have a responsibility as men to work and try to educate other men, because that's how we're going to see these harms happen less often. And also along that way, we may allow for other men to be willing to communicate, hey, I've also been a victim. Because if we're willing to have hard conversations with men, men are going to be willing to have hard conversations with us.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ways that we tackled this with BMEN, or through a community program we did with a few guys that I've known who all do some sort of men's work to some degree. And for folks that don't know, men's work is men responding to the needs of other men, uh, generally in progressive ways. I think when it's not progressive, it can kind of move toward the manosphere. And then there's sometimes a weird in between that happens there that I'm still trying to put words on. But what we did to address that is that we did this working with men to respond to communal sexual violence. We did a workshop. It's like 4 weeks. And each man had to, and we talked through all these big things, but each man had to come with a story of their own sort of problematic sexual behavior or advance from from minor to the most serious, uh, being like sexual assault or something along that range. And everybody brought a story, and everybody was there, talked about a thing, including me. Uh, and what made that important is that one thing that happens when we start talking about responding to men and violence is, we get white knights, and it bothers me so much. And and what I mean by that, we get these guys who feel like they are outside of the possibility of doing harm, and then they often with good intentions want to like lead, and because there's a gap in vulnerability, it tends to be a lot of people preaching to the choir. So I wanted to build a space where men are coming in, understanding that, hey, I can learn and being accountable to other men. So the caveat to that is that the space was curated not for men, not as a baseline for men to be better to women. That's going to be a benefit from us coming together. But men had to understand their own relationship to consent and understand how to be better to themselves. And then we can actually recognize the things that are happening with the folks in our world. Because men, a lot of times, we don't even know. I learned how to say no from women. Let me just say that. Like, it wasn't men who taught me how to say no. Physical confrontations, like, don't let nobody hurt you, or like, sure, we get those messages from guys, but like how to say no, like really clearly, and like, I don't like that. Don't touch me. No, thank you. That all came from women. So us being in a space where guys are really processing like how we've been socialized around consent was like such a powerful part of that little program that we made.
Yeah, it's fun thinking about it too, because like if we talk about consent, obviously it's like both parties need to like fully agree and want to do it. But as guys, we're taught we're just supposed to do. Like this is our role, so you should want to do this. Well, if I don't want to do it, but I'm forcing myself to do it anyway, the relationship that I have with consent is that my consent doesn't matter.
Right.
Because sure, I don't want to do this, but I'm just going to do it because that's what I should be doing. So it's like you said, if we don't have that good relationship and consent with ourselves, like how are we ever going to have a good relationship with consent with other people?
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's when the angle from which I address things with men, if I'm working with men, is not the same as if I'm working with people who are categorized by being victims or women. I'm not having the same conversation in the same way because people have different needs.
Yeah.
But when I'm talking to men or about the nature of men and violence, I find myself having to remind folks that like the biggest victims of violence are men. And I'm not saying that to like compete. I'm saying it as a framing for like women are afraid of men as they should be, and men are also afraid of other men. And it's just such a normal thing that we don't even consider unpacking or like addressing, that it hurts the people around us when we don't. So like I had to bring in that thing where men are talking about their relationship with other men, their relationship to consent. Because a lot of male horseplaying, it's no consent. Nobody's asking you, can we do this thing? Like it's not happening that way. So that's how I try to at least make it relatable with these sort of big conversations.
I just want to say, like, I feel like I don't know why, but this is like blowing my mind right now to think about. Most men are taught, right? Don't hit women. But it shouldn't be that conversation. It should be don't hit anybody.
Right.
And
Right.
Yes, women will benefit from that because we don't hit anybody. But there's such a a roughhouse way that boys interact with each other from, being toddlers that like it di- I don't know how this didn't even like click in my head that men also have to be afraid of men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're blowing my mind right now. I feel completely silly like for this to just be my revelation right now because I feel like should be something that I had known, but the way that you're talking about it is just enlightening me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm glad. And this is not an uncommon sort of response that I get from people when I say it that way. And part of it is because men generally want women to feel protected. And generally, now how we might go about that, like is, we can have there's a lot we can say about that.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us are okay with women understanding that they should not be harmed in ways that we do not feel about ourselves. And so this figuring out that piece. And then when we start talking about how would you feel when someone touched you and you didn't want to be touched, and then you start adding in women to the conversation, and now the bridge is a lot easier to walk down because you started with the relationship to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is fun thinking about too, just like even a lot of like the sports and stuff too that we push boys to like participate in. Like, yes, there's other sports too, like swimming or like tennis, but thinking about the sports that men primarily play, like they're all physical contact sports.
Yeah.
So it's like physical contact aggression is something that has been completely ignored as anything other than acceptable for men to be able to do. So yeah, we're going to have violence committed against us by other men, but that's the expectation. Like, I should expect some form of violence to happen to me from men because that's who we are, right? We solve problems through violence. Like, if you don't get into one bar fight, like, did you really go to the bar?
Mm-hmm.
So these are common experiences that a lot of men have, is having been in a physical fight at some point.
Yeah.
And that's not seen as anything other than like a rite of passage.
Right. And the other part of that is that men are doing these things. I used to go play basketball a lot, less so now. I'm older, got other things to do. My time isn't the same. But I remember wondering one day, I was like, man, I wonder if these men have been touched by anybody aside from on the court, like as in physical contact at all. And I think men, part of what happens with sexual assault or problematic sexual advances is that, for one, men think that that's the only way to receive healthy sort of, or not healthy, but receive any sort of touch or physical contact. And they don't know how to quite ask for it when they need it. Like, not saying ignorance is the primary form of reason why people do sexual assault and sexual violence, but I think that lack of tending to this need for men, which is part of it is that I serve it through BMEN and other things that I do. You get these sort of outcomes where they believe that they're owed this sort of exchange by virtue of their interpretation of the masculinity that they have been imposed on them, that the women in their life or the men in their life, because some men are gay. This sort of imposing on people to get your needs met happens.
And I think almost looking at and taking it just like a slight step further too is we're not taught obviously how to have the conversation of like, hey, I just need a hug right now, right? Or I just need I need something. But we are taught that if I do something for someone, I can get that.
Yes.
So what ends up happening is we are taught and learn through these teachings that any form of physical contact that we deem that we would like to have has to be transactional.
Yes.
I have to do something for someone in order to receive that physical contact.
Mm-hmm.
And while yes, it's entirely problematic, right? Like people you're with in relationships, like you should be able to have that without feeling like it has to be transactional. That's
Right.
kind of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
It's the men who buy someone drinks at the bar and then expect to get that physical contact back because they bought those drinks.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who takes someone out on a date and they expect, or they go to prom with this person and they expect to have that physical contact because they paid for dinner.
Right.
Yeah, that's viewing it as transactional. You're viewing that person as a sexual object in that moment, but you're also not taught how to do anything else other than have a transaction to get physical contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like that's why I want there to be opportunities for men to exist in ways that feel fulfilling. So there's been all types of male development and mentoring and support that has happened since the beginning of time, been called different things. A lot of times it's embedded in different rites of passage, sort of cultural formations. And those exist. And I try to lean toward in my approach, a masculinity affirming, responsive model to the social problems that we're navigating. Because there is some sort of transformational masculinity positions that are out there. There's a lot of positions around hegemonic masculinity being, which is a dominating masculinity being the predominant form for some people. But generally, I want to call men toward a way to feel their masculinity that's affirming to themselves, provide safety to the people around them, that's gentle and caring, that's not just limited to caring for your children or your parents, that you can ask people how they're doing and how they're feeling and give them hugs and tell them you love them at any point in your life and in your day. And and that sort of trust and vulnerability creates a preventative model for the things that happen when men are in isolation and they harm and they engage in domestic violence or sexual violence or addiction. That's how I think about it. It's just building a formula that prevents a lot of these things before they happen.
It's one of the conversations I enjoy having with men too, or especially around masculinity, because there's the aspects around masculinity are good. Like we should want to be able to protect other people. We should want to do what we can to help others. It's just that how we're taught to do those things doesn't necessarily play out in a way that is respectful of others or is actually a good way of going about it.
Mm-hmm.
So helping men try to understand, like, it's great that you want to be a protector, but do you want to be a protector to the point that you have to control everything?
Yeah.
Because if that's where you're at, you're no longer protecting, you're controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So you've taken this well-intentioned thing and gone now to the extreme where it is actually causing harm instead of actually being beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And helping men kind of recognize that can be a difficult thing to do because once you're in that position of power, right, it's hard to relinquish some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. And a lot of guys, another thing that I do that probably yields to sort of things that you're talking about, uh, is I try to create spaces for people to talk about it. I think we're very tentative as a society now because nobody wants to get a thing wrong.
Yeah.
So sometimes we just don't have conversations that we should be having. But I need to have discussions with my community, with the guys around me, whether informally or formally, about these big things like being in control, like the violence. And so they can hear from others some more protective and corrective responses. So thinking about when R. Kelly's trial came about, I had a lot of conversations with people, and people were not as progressive as I thought they were, and it wasn't the people that I thought. And this is just across the communities that I was in and around, and even the sort of Epstein sort of stuff with the big topics that happen in social media or in our world, using those as opportunities to build relationships and hear from folks and to model responding in ways that are careful and thoughtful, as well as fielding ideas and being the first stop for someone that might need a little bit of refinement, and being the person that can do that. An example of how I did that would be Men. I don't know if y'all know who Kendrick Lamar is. Okay,
My son loves Kendrick Lamar. It's great.
Okay, shout out to your son. Yes, he's great. My daughter's a Drake fan. She hasn't been enjoying the past year's conversation. But we did an event. Kendrick came out an album called Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. That was a couple of years ago, and we did a circle with Black men talking about the themes in the album, and all of the themes in the album were about vulnerability. He talks about abuse. He talks. I think he talks about alcoholism at some point. He talks about LGBTQ issues. He just goes into the so many different themes that we use that as a stepping off point. So I would want for other men and other communities to like not be afraid of the conversations, so that you can kind of get to the bottom of the things that are impacting how people act.
And that's one of the things I love about like some aspects of my job too, is being able to use things in media to help facilitate some of those conversations. Because if I'm trying to come into a room and just talk, right, there's no frame of reference, there's no connecting pieces that they can kind of visualize or see or hear how these things actually play out. So when I can use media, especially media people enjoy, and connect that back, it helps kind of bridge the gap of what I'm saying and how it looks, or what I'm saying and what's actually happening. So it's just, I love hearing the using of Kendrick's album to facilitate that, because it's one of the things I love to do, is try to use media to help facilitate some of the conversations, especially the harder ones.
Yeah.
And especially with groups of people who may not have the lived experiences of what's being portrayed in media, to help them gain that empathy.
Yeah.
And being able to have like that a little bit more positive role model, especially in rap music, like, or hip hop music, R&B music, whatever. If you go back into the late 80s, the early 90s, even into like the 2000s, every rap artist that was out there, every Black group that was out there, the music was mostly based on some sort of violence happening, right? I mean, like you had, I guess, like Tupac, who kind of would, bridge some of those gaps or whatever.
I would argue Tupac has a great song that supports everything that we talk about, but I use it in one of my presentations.
But I'm saying, like, that's just a sign of the progression that we've maybe kind of had as a society too, where those media images are just reinforcing a stereotype of this is how men are, this is how Black men are. And, if we want people to be able to see themselves as something other than that, we have to give them something to see, right? You have to have something to kind of look up to. And for a lot of men and a lot of Black men, there isn't that maybe positive emotional role model in their life that they can look to. There's no one modeling that behavior for them. So if you can get a popular rapper who they can see themselves in, who says it's okay to feel these things, it's okay to say these things, like, we're just going to be better as a society when people can look at something to live up to almost. And I don't know if that came off right, because I just started rambling a little bit in the end there, but in my head, it sounded really good.
No, I appreciate that. I think I know what you're getting at. And we have I call it just a hegemonic drive in society to view Black men a certain way. So we'll have artists making great music with positive messages, but they won't be mainstream.
It gets drowned out.
Yeah, it gets very much so drowned out, and we'll have bubbles that happen sometimes, because in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a big wave of rap that was really positive and spoke to a lot of racial pride and just things that felt good, and I'm a bit conspiratorial in this and the rise of prison industrial complex. And there are certain artists that were beginning to be pushed out that fit some of the things that you're describing. But we want Black men to be able to see and understand the men in their lives as valuable and human and real and positive, so that they're not living with the assumption that they meet these caricatures that you're mentioning that come out, and you can make an argument that it's very minstrelly in the sense that they are negative hyper representations of Black men that people will consume. Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit about, so Akon's one of my favorite artists.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that Akon, like, as he was like coming up, like his management staff, like they had to kind of facilitate this imagery around him to make him really look like a convicted felon, right?
Oh, wow.
Like they had to build this imagery around him, and yes, he did go to jail. Years for I think it was like either stealing cars or like selling stolen cars or something. So like not like the worst crimes ever, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But building that image of someone who had been in and out of jail, so he's got to be tough, he's got to be strong, he's been in the system. That was what was helping propel Akon's career early on, because he needed to fit into that imagery of what it looked like to be a Black artist at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting seeing like how these things can play out, because like that's literally how Akon kind of like at the initial part like got his lift, like got going, was he needed that imagery, so they created that imagery to help him get his career going.
Like I guess on a sort of tangential but kind of related approach, having to fit a mold in order to get access to a larger audience as it relates to nonprofits and advocacy. I tell people this often. I said, if I went around saying that Black men were suffering from hegemonic masculinity and need to unlearn all of the things that they learned from white patriarchy, my organization will have $1 million. Because people want to hear certain sort of negative framings of Blackness, and they'll consume that, and it takes a lot to learn how to counter it, and to be able to deliver the things that you want to deliver to your audiences. And for me, it's taken a lot of reading, a lot of meditation, a lot of community. Because me getting here and speaking well is not an accident. Like I have to study this stuff in order to be able to know how to present it in a way that people will receive it. But yeah, that's hard as a part of the challenge.
Yeah, and it's a part of the challenge that I think is very easily lost to white people, right? Because it's not something that I have to deal with. I don't have to go in front of an audience and really think about what my phrasing is, what if I'm using slang or if I'm not using slang. Like I don't have to dictate or change what I'm saying in front of an audience, because that audience has this expectation. But as a Black man, I can imagine having to really change some of the ways that you would say things, the making sure that if you're using slang, it's slang that the audience will recognize, and having that, like, I use it with my students, is like they're always shocked when I know some of like their slang and stuff too. It's like because I had to be on TikTok to understand like what you guys are saying to begin with. So yes, I'm going to use it to make you kind of like cringe a little bit. But it's like the AAV stuff, like understanding is like, yeah, I understand what my students are saying, and like I throw it in every now and then. And so because then my students will hear me do that, and they're like, oh, okay, so this isn't just some like white dude from like a well-off area. Regardless of like what my background is, right? But like it helps me gain some clout with my students. But I don't have to worry about that necessarily. Like I don't have to cognitively think about like what I'm saying to make sure that I'm coming off as well spoken enough to make sure people are actually hearing me.
Mm-hmm.
because my identity allows for me to not have to worry about that. And that gets, I think, lost on a lot of white people when it comes to these conversations, because it's not something we have to worry about.
Facts.
So, Martin, with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we sign out here, though, is there anything that you want to make sure that you kind of like leave on a high point for our audience?
Yeah, I think we should think about the ways that we are responding to violence and harm in our communities that isn't waiting for the thing to happen and then administering some punitive response. So how are we preventing these things? How are we giving people room and space to be seen as humans? That's a part of how we stop sexual violence. It's a part of how we stop domestic violence. It's a part of how we have integrated and communities that feel real, that feel representative of the folks we want to be around. In BMEN, we say healthy Black men make healthy Black communities, and that's what I'm always trying to do. Now, just to let y'all know about BMEN Foundation, every second Sunday, we have a digital space and an in-person space in Boston that we do for Black men to come and be a part of. In October, beginning on Saturday the 4th, we have a train the trainer for Black men's groups. So if you're listening to this, you're in Boston and you want to learn more about Black men's groups, that's what we're doing. So check our website out for more information.
Awesome. I'll make sure I link some of that in the show notes as well for people if they want to check that out. So thank you so much for joining us today, Martin. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And then just real quick, if people want to find you on social media, where could they find you?
You can find me at Till We Free. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm also on Medium at Martin H. Speaks. Oh, no, that's on Substack. Medium is Till We Free. I'm writing. You'll catch me on podcasts. I'm out here. Just check me out.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I link those in the show notes as well for people so they can follow you on social media and check out everything else you got going on.
For sure.
So thanks again for joining us today, Martin. And thank you all for listening today. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Touchy Subs Pod to keep up to date when we have new episodes and other content coming out. Please email us any questions, comments, or concerns to touchysubjectspodcast@gmail.com. And please rate and follow us on your favorite podcast listening app. It really does help the show out.
And in the meantime, don't be afraid to challenge, ask, and discuss when it comes to touchy subjects.